March 18th, 1945. Oranienburg, Germany. The roar of 1,200 horsepower Packard Merlin engines split the frozen sky as Captain Wendell Pruitt, flight leader of the 332nd Fighter Group, banked his crimson-tailed P-51 Mustang over the smoldering ruins of a Luftwaffe airfield. Below, Wehrmacht officers stumbled from their command bunker, faces turned upward in disbelief. We came in so low, I could see their expressions change from confidence to terror. They never thought Negro pilots could fly like that. The training was merciless. Cadets woke at 0400 hours for calisthenics in Alabama, humidity that felt like breathing through wet wool. By 0530, they were in ground school, memorizing the physics of lift and drag, calculating fuel consumption rates, studying aircraft recognition silhouettes until they could identify a Messerschmitt Bf-109 from 3 miles at 20,000 feet. The math was relentless. Airspeed triangulation, drift correction angles, lead computing for deflection shooting. Many cadets had college degrees, engineers, teachers, chemists, yet instructors treated them like children, waiting for failure. Flight training began on PT-17 Stearmans, open cockpit biplanes that bucked like wild horses in Alabama's unpredictable winds. Student pilots practiced takeoffs and landings until their hands blistered on the stick, learning to feel the aircraft through their bodies. The buffet of a pre-stall shake, the subtle mushiness of rudder at low speed, the vicious snap of a botched spin recovery. Charles DeBow, a Chicago native who'd studied aeronautical engineering at MIT, nearly washed out when he froze during his first solo flight. His instructor, a white Southerner named Captain Robert Long, gave him one more chance. DeBow climbed to 5,000 feet, said a prayer, and executed a perfect chandelle. Long nodded once. No praise, no encouragement. Just the bare minimum acknowledgement that DeBow had met the standard. They progressed to BT-13s, low-wing monoplanes with retractable gear and more power and more ways to die. Then came the AT-6s, advanced trainers with 600 horsepower engines and variable pitch propellers. Here, the training turned lethal. Cadets practiced dogfighting maneuvers. The Immelman turn, the split S, the defensive break. They flew formations so tight their wingtips were separated by inches, learning to trust each other in 3 dimensions, while white officers on the ground wagered on how many would crash. 2 cadets died in a mid-air collision over Chehaw, Alabama, in July 1942. The Negro press covered the tragedy. The white press ignored it. Training continued without pause. The aircraft they trained to fly told its own story. Initially equipped with P-40 Warhawks sturdy but outclassed by German fighters, the Tuskegee squadrons would have to prove their worth before receiving better equipment. The P-40 was a 4,200-pound fighter with a 1,200 horsepower Allison engine that gave it a top speed of 360 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. It carried 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing, each gun firing 800 rounds per minute with a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second. The math mattered. At 400 yards, deflection shooting required leading a target by 50 feet if crossing at 90 degrees. Split-second calculations while pulling 4 Gs in a screaming dive. By April 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron deployed to North Africa with 33 pilots and 27 P-40 Warhawks. They arrived at Farjuna, Tunisia, to skepticism from white units and outright hostility from some commanders. Their first mission, a patrol over Pantelleria Island, drew no enemy contact. Critics seized on this as proof of inadequacy, ignoring that most patrols saw no action. When Lieutenant Charles Hall scored the squadron's first aerial victory on July 2, 1943, shooting down a Focke-Wulf 12-190 over Sicily, the doubters claimed it was a fluke. When the 99th flew 311 sorties during the Sicily campaign without losing a single bomber they escorted, critics remained silent. Success without praise, failure with condemnation. The pattern held. By January 1944, the Tuskegee experiment had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. The original 99th Squadron was joined by 3 more squadrons, the 100th, the 301st, and the 302nd, forming the 332nd Fighter Group, under Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. They deployed to Ramitelli, Italy, a windswept airfield on the Adriatic coast where winter mud sucked at aircraft wheels and cold fog grounded missions for days. The group painted their P-47 Thunderbolt tails red, a recognition symbol that would become legendary. On February 7, 1944, the group flew its first mission to northern Italy, escorting B-24s against a railroad marshalling yard at Pontedera. Captain Lemuel Custis led a flight of 4 P-47s, nursing his throttle to stay with the bomber's 170-mile-per-hour cruise speed. At 22,000 feet, the formation entered flak range. Black puffs blossomed across the sky, 88mm shells bursting with shrapnel that could tear a wing off. Custis heard the snap of fragments against his fuselage, felt the aircraft shudder. His wingman, Lieutenant Robert Days, called out engine smoke. Days stayed in formation for another 30 miles, nursing his damaged Thunderbolt, before breaking off to limp back to Ramitelli. He made it. The bomber crews noticed. Word spread. The Red Tails don't quit. But the real test came in March 1944, when the group transitioned to P-51 Mustangs. The Mustang was the answer to every escort pilot's prayer. Powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, generating 1,200 horsepower with a 2-stage supercharger, the P-51 could reach 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. With drop tanks, it had the range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back a 1,600-mile round trip. It carried 650 caliber machine guns with 1,800 rounds total, and it could outturn, outclimb, and outdive almost anything the Luftwaffe flew. On March 24, 1944, the group escorted bombers to Berlin for the first time, 360 miles from Ramitelli to the German capital, through defended airspace where the Luftwaffe concentrated its best fighters and densest flak belts. Captain Wendell Pruitt led a flight of 8 Mustangs at 28,000 feet, scanning the sky for the distinctive silhouettes of Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf W190s. The bomber stream stretched for miles, 96 B-17 flying fortresses in staggered formations, their contrails marking the sky like chalk lines on a blackboard. 20 miles from Berlin, the Luftwaffe struck. A formation of 30 Fu-190s dove from above, cannon blazing, aiming for the lead bombers. Pruitt called the break, "Red flight, engage. Stay close." His wingmen, Lieutenants Roscoe Brown, Charles Brantley, and Earl Lane followed him into a Chandelle climb, gaining altitude to meet the attackers. The Focke-Wulfs were fast 425 miles per hour in a dive, but the Mustangs were faster. Brown locked onto a 190 and fired a 2-second burst from 300 yards. The German fighter's engine exploded in a spray of coolant and fire. The pilot bailed out. The mission that would cement the legend came on March 18, 1945. The target, Oranienburg, 15 miles north of Berlin, home to a sprawling industrial complex that produced aircraft components for the Luftwaffe. The raid was secondary to a larger strategic goal, smashing German transportation networks to prevent reinforcement of the Eastern Front. But for the 332nd Fighter Group, Oranienburg became the moment when doubt died and legacy was born. 64 P-51 Mustangs lifted from Ramitelli at 0700 hours, engines howling in the dawn cold. Captain Wendell Pruitt led the group, his crimson-tailed Mustang nicknamed Red Lightning, climbing through scattered clouds toward the bomber rendezvous point over the Adriatic. The formation included every available pilot, many flying their 50th or 60th mission, some on their last flight before rotation home. Lieutenant William Wild Bill Campbell, A Tennessee native who'd survived the Memphis race riots before enlisting flew wing on Pruitt. Campbell's face was tight with concentration. He'd lost his best friend to flak over Munich 2 weeks earlier. This mission was personal. They met the bomber stream at 18,000 feet, 48 B-17 Flying Fortresses, loaded with 500-pound bombs. The route took them northeast, across Austria, over Czechoslovakia, into the heart of Germany. The flight time, 3 hours each way. Fuel was critical. Each Mustang carried two 75-gallon drop tanks, but even with external fuel, the margin for combat was razor thin. Stay too long in a dogfight, and you'd run dry over hostile territory, break off too soon, and bombers died. Pruitt briefed his pilots over the radio. "We stay with them all the way. If we fight smart. No heroics, no glory hunting. Bring everyone home." At 1100 hours, the formation crossed into German airspace. The sky changed. Contrails crisscrossed above high-altitude fighters, shadowing the raid. The bomber crews tightened formation, gunners scanning the sky through plexiglass blisters. Then the call came over the radio, crackling with static and urgency. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high, coming down." 20 Messerschmitt Bf-109s dove from 35,000 feet, cannons firing. The 109 was Germany's workhorse fighter, sleek, fast, deadly. Powered by a 1,200 horsepower Daimler-Benz inverted V12 engine, it could hit 370 miles per hour and climb like a rocket. Armed with two 13mm machine guns and a 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, it could shred a bomber with a single pass. The Luftwaffe pilots were veterans, survivors of 4 years of air war, and they knew the Red Tail's reputation. They came in fast, aiming to scatter the escort and isolate the bombers. Pruitt yanked his stick left, rolling inverted, pulling 6 Gs as blood drained from his head. His vision tunneled. He grunted against the pressure, tightening his stomach muscles to force blood back to his brain. Red flight, engage. Watch your 6. He dove after the lead 109, closing from 400 yards to 200. The German pilot saw him coming, broke hard right. Pruitt anticipated, led the turn, fired a 3-second burst. Tracers arced across the sky every 5th round, a phosphorus marker glowing white-hot. The round stitched across the 109's fuselage. The canopy shattered. The Messerschmitt rolled inverted and spun earthward, trailing smoke. But there were too many. Lieutenant Campbell called out, "Got 2 on my tail, can't shake them." Pruitt saw it 2 109s scissoring behind Campbell, closing for the kill. Campbell threw his Mustang into a violent skid, losing speed, forcing the Germans to overshoot. One did. The other held, firing. Rounds sparked off Campbell's wing. Pruitt rolled in from above, diving at 500 miles per hour, the Mustang's airframe shuddering with speed. He fired from 100 yards too close, but no choice. His rounds tore through the 109's engine. The Daimler-Benz exploded. Pruitt yanked back on the stick, missing the fireball by feet. Campbell was safe. Barely. The dogfight spread across 20 miles of sky. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown engaged a Focke-Wulf 4-190D, the Luftwaffe's latest fighter, powered by a turbocharged Junkers engine that gave it 440 miles per hour at altitude. The 190 pilot was good, maybe great. He scissored, reversed, tried every trick to get behind Brown. But Brown was better. He'd studied aircraft performance tables until he could recite them in his sleep. He knew the Mustang could outturn the 190 above 20,000 feet. He climbed, forcing the German to follow, burning his energy in a vertical fight. At 28,000 feet, the 190 stalled. Brown rolled over the top, dove, fired. The 190's cockpit disintegrated. The pilot never got out. Through it all, the bombers pressed on. Flak opened up over Oranienburg 88mm guns, firing in coordinated barrages, filling the sky with shrapnel. One B-17 took a direct hit, exploded in midair. Debris rained down. The remaining bombers held formation, bomb bay doors opening. The bombardiers toggled their loads. 500-pound bombs tumbled earthward, 6 per aircraft. 288 bombs total. 15 seconds later, the industrial complex erupted. Fires spread. Secondary explosions rippled through warehouses. The mission was a success, but the fight wasn't over. As the bombers turned for home, Captain Pruitt spotted something below Oranienburg airfield, less than 5 miles from the target. On the runway, he counted 12 aircraft, a mix of 109s, 190s, and twin-engine Junkers Ju-88s, ground targets. His fuel gauge showed enough for one more pass. He radioed his flight. "Red flight. We're going downstairs. Hit the airfield. Don't linger." It was a calculated risk. Low-altitude strafing runs were suicidal if the flak was heavy. But those 12 aircraft on the ground represented 12 fighters that wouldn't hunt bombers tomorrow. Pruitt rolled into a dive, descending from 20,000 feet to 500 in 30 seconds. The airspeed indicator climbed past 500 miles per hour. The Mustang's wings groaned with stress. At 2,000 feet, he leveled out, the airfield rushing toward him. He could see Wehrmacht officers running from a bunker, faces turned upward. He could see ground crews scrambling. He armed all 6 .50 calibers, thumbed the trigger. The guns roared, 4,800 rounds per minute, combined rate of fire. The recoil slowed the Mustang by 10 miles per hour. Tracers ripped across the runway, tearing through parked aircraft. One 109 exploded, fuel tanks igniting. Another burst into flames. A Junkers Ju-88, its twin engines already running, tried to taxi clear. Pruitt fired again, walking rounds up the fuselage. The bomber's cockpit shattered. The pilot slumped forward. Behind him, Lieutenants Campbell, Brown, and Brantley made their passes, each pilot selecting a target, firing, pulling up through the flak. 40mm Bofors guns opened up from the field perimeter, tracers arcing upward in lazy red curves that accelerated to lethal speed. Campbell felt rounds hit his tail section. His Mustang yawed hard right. He corrected, climbing, checking his instruments. Oil pressure steady. Hydraulics good. He was lucky. The rounds had missed critical systems. He reformed on Pruitt, who was already climbing back to altitude, rejoining the bombers. But the cost was real. Lieutenant Earl Lane, flying rear guard, took flak through his engine on the way out. His Mustang lost power, started losing altitude. He radioed calmly, "I'm not going to make it home, boys." Heading for the deck, he nursed the dying Mustang down to 500 feet, looking for a place to crash land. Over the radio, his squadron mates heard the impact, a dull crunch, then silence. Lane survived the crash, was captured by Wehrmacht soldiers, and spent the last 6 weeks of the war as a POW. He came home in May 1945, 20 pounds lighter, but alive. The surviving Mustangs escorted the bombers back across Germany, Austria, and into Italy. They landed at Ramitelli at 1500 hours, 7 hours after takeoff. Ground crews counted bullet holes, patched wings, refueled empty tanks. Pruitt climbed out of his cockpit, exhausted, and wrote in his log, 9 destroyed on ground, 2 in air, Lane down. Mission success. That night, in the officers' barracks, the pilots didn't celebrate. They mourned Lane, toasted his survival, and prepared for the next mission. There was always a next mission. The numbers tell one story. By war's end, the 332nd Fighter Group flew 1,578 combat missions, destroyed 261 enemy aircraft, and sank or damaged countless ground targets, trains, trucks, barges, airfields. They earned 3 Distinguished Unit citations, 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 14 Bronze Stars. 150 Tuskegee Airmen were killed in action or lost to accidents. 32 were shot down and became prisoners of war. Their loss rate was lower than the overall 15th Air Force average, a testament to skill, training, and discipline. But the deeper story is what they proved. The Tuskegee Airmen demolished the pseudoscientific racism that claimed Negro men were unfit for combat aviation. They proved it in the air, mission by mission, kill by kill, until even the most hardened skeptics had to acknowledge reality. Bomber crews requested them by name. Luftwaffe pilots learned to avoid the red tails. Wehrmacht officers who watched the Oranienburg strafing run filed reports describing the attackers as highly skilled and fearless language never applied to Negro soldiers in official German documents before that day. Yet the recognition came slowly, grudgingly, and often too late. When Captain Wendell Pruitt returned to the United States in June 1945, he couldn't eat in most restaurants in his hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. When Lieutenant Roscoe Brown tried to buy a house in a white neighborhood in New York, he was refused. When the war ended, the Army began deactivating Negro units, reassigning Tuskegee Airmen to menial duties or discharging them without ceremony. The contradiction burned. They'd fought for a nation that still refused them basic dignity. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., promoted to general in 1954, became the first Negro officer to command an integrated flying wing. But integration didn't mean equality. Negro pilots faced discrimination in promotions, assignments, and housing for decades. It took until 1994, 49 years after the war, for the Tuskegee Airmen to receive a group award, the inaugural Red Tails Trophy from the Air Force Association. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen collectively. By then, most were in their 80s or 90s. Some had died without ever receiving the recognition they'd earned. The 332nd Fighter Group's coat of arms tells its own story. The shield features a black panther on a scarlet field, strength, courage, and the red tails that made them famous. The crest bears a torch, symbolizing enlightenment and the breaking of barriers. The motto, Tuskegee Airmen, Guardians of Freedom. The lineage continues today in the 332nd Air Expeditionary Wing, operating from undisclosed locations in support of ongoing combat operations. Modern pilots wear the red tail patch with pride, knowing the legacy they carry. Memorials dot the country. At Tuskegee, the National Historic Site preserves Hangar 1 and Moton Field, where the first cadets trained. At the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, a statue of a Tuskegee Airman stands in full flight gear, face turned skyward. In Washington, D.C., the National Museum of African American History and Culture displays a P-51 Mustang in red tail livery, a tangible reminder of courage under fire. Every year, Tuskegee Airmen reunions draw smaller crowds as the greatest generation passes. Soon, there will be none left to tell the story firsthand. Wendell Pruitt didn't live to see most of this recognition. On April 15, 1945, less than a month after the Oranienburg mission, he was killed in a training accident at Tuskegee Army Airfield. His P-51 clipped a treetop during a low-altitude pass, crashed, and exploded. He was 23 years old. He had flown 70 combat missions, destroyed 11 enemy aircraft, and earned a Distinguished Flying Cross. At his funeral, Colonel Davis said, "He flew like he believed in tomorrow. He fought like he was already free." Lieutenant Roscoe Brown lived until 2016, dying at age 94. He earned a Ph.D., became president of Bronx Community College, and spent his later years speaking to schools about the Tuskegee experience. In an interview in 2012, he said, "We didn't fight for glory. We fought because someone had to prove that excellence has no color. And we proved it. Every mission, Every sortie, every time we brought those bombers home, we proved it. The bomber crews never forgot. In reunions after the war, B-17 and B-24 veterans sought out Tuskegee Airmen to shake their hands and say thank you. One tail gunner, a white farm boy from Iowa, told Lieutenant Lee Archer in 1996, "You saved my life 3 times over Germany. I didn't care what color you were. I just cared that you stayed with us when other escorts left. You were the best we ever flew with." Archer, by then 75 years old, simply nodded. "That was the job," he said. The Wehrmacht officers who stumbled from their bunker at Oranienburg on March 18th, 1945, learned what American racists had refused to believe. Courage, skill, and honor know no color. The Luftwaffe pilots who tangled with the Red Tails learned it in the sky, one dogfight at a time. The bomber crews learned it through survival, and history learned it through sacrifice. Captain Wendell Pruitt, in a letter to his mother written the night before the Oranienburg mission, captured the essence of the Tuskegee legacy. "We fly not for glory, but for the simple truth that we are men equal in the eyes of God and deserving of respect in the eyes of our country. If we must prove it with our blood, then so be it." Their story must be remembered, because they didn't just fight a war. They won a battle against ignorance, and in doing so, they changed the world.